My name is Erik. I work as a consultant and I've been doing that for this is my 10th year actually of being self-employed and working with new ways of working. I think I have been poking around with new ways of working for the past 20 or something years. So that's a lot of learnings. And the idea of creating teal dots inside orange worlds or inside of any kind of world where it's not natural is that's what we're going to dive into today. And I brought Susanne. We've been working together for 5 years. Will you say something about yourself?
Yes, I can do that. So I'm a vice president in a world-leading biotech company called Novozymes, which is a pretty progressive organization in and of itself, but still I felt the need to build what we today call a teal dot and different ways of leading and organizing. And I've had Erik help me in two of those journeys and experiments, and it's some of those learnings that we would like to share with you today from a practitioner's point of view in terms of what has worked, what's been difficult, and share that openly with you.
Good. We will spend like the first 25 minutes or so on storytelling, and then we'll have the last part to discuss your thinking. Sebastian, I need presenter skills, not skills, power to do that. So I just need that from you. There we go. So nearly there, just setting up and clicking around to make sure that we got it all. With that, I'll just give the mouse to Susanne and tell us.
Yes, thanks a lot. Yeah, so again, as I said in the beginning, what we're going to share today is kind of the sum of two different experiments that we have been running and that are still running in Novozymes. And the way we've structured the session today, can you do the clicking?
I can do.
Good, thanks. Teamwork here. Is that we will tell you a little bit about, you can say, the why. So why have we chosen to venture into this, and maybe also what has changed over time in these 5 years. A little bit about the what, but also some practical things on the how, just in terms of what are some of the things that we have been doing. And then zoom out on some of the reflections and learnings. And there's a lot, but we've tried to just pinpoint a few of what has been the most common across the two experiments, but more than happy to share more about those learnings. So please, as Sebastian said, just post questions into the Menti, and we'll leave plenty of time for discussions. So, but first of all, why at all choose to go into this journey when you can just sit happily in your orange world and live, in my case, a happy corporate life? And these are just some of the reasons for why I thought that was important. The first one is speed of change. And I think, coming out of a 2022, I don't think that's a new context to anybody, but it was as relevant to back in 17, 18 when we started this journey. That at least my observation, also being in a commercial organization, was that the speed of change outside the company, the speed of change in the environment, with our suppliers, with our customers, was actually happening at what I perceived was at a faster pace than we were able to follow. And this is not to say that Novozymes is a slow company, but it's just to say that there's so much going on in a global organization that you need to be able to respond to. And to me, part of that response was actually making sure that we empower the front line and make sure that decisions are made to where, at least I believe, that the best ability to make those decisions sit. And that is not necessarily, as you all know, running up the hierarchy and then waiting for a meeting 2 weeks down the line, because then you could say the situation, the urgency has passed. So the ability to actually use these experiments as a way to mobilize the front line, whether it's on the supplier side or on the customer side, and make sure that employees know what are the boundaries within which they can make the decisions, and also, of course, how do you utilize the fact that you're part of a global organization? How do you strike that right balance is some of the things we'll touch upon. Then the whole thing about the notion of workplace. So again, we started one of the experiments pre-corona, then came corona. We run the experiment through there, and now we're in a post-corona with everything that has done to the way that we perceive work, the way that we would like to work, the differences that we need to cater for, not just hybrid versus non-hybrid, but also different life phases in our life where that calls for different ways of working. And to me, that also means that as a company, you need to change and be adaptive to what is the notion of work and how do we perceive work and how do we organize corporates in a way that we remain relevant and people don't branch out and become either independent entrepreneurs or join startups because they perceive that to be more flexible. So I also think it's a call for action for corporates to stay relevant. And that also means that you can say the fundamental view of what it is an organization has been changing again over the past maybe 10 years from being of a more closed environment where everything was kind of residing within, all the knowledge was built and you promoted people up. What the reality that we live in right now is a much more connected world, also opening up and collaborating with universities, entrepreneurs, sourcing in technology, co-creating with customers. So again, how do you create an organization that's able to do that? And that calls then for, you can say, different ways also of leading. And I think that's maybe been, again, I'm a leader, I'm leading leaders. And I think that's been where I will, take a lot of the learnings is around the change of the leadership role and how do we then, what is actually then our role as leaders and how do we adapt as individuals and this fear of becoming obsolete because now you've worked hard in the corporate world and then you've worked your way up through the ranks and then suddenly I'm delayering and taking away what you thought was your path to heaven. So how do you actually deal with that also at an individual level? What are the emotions that come into play are some of the learnings that we would like to share with you today. And maybe just again in the spirit of sharing, if you can click to the next, what I did with my last leadership team, the first leadership meeting we had. So as you do in corporates, we had a reorganization. I had a completely new leadership team. And I thought that why don't I start by introducing what am I for a type of leader, what has shaped me, and what is some of the literature and beliefs that I get inspired by. And believe it or not, that was actually the first time that they had that kind of introduction, apart from, you can say, what are we here to do and what's the strategy and must-win battles and all those things. But you can say sharing from a personal level, what is it that I believe in? And this is, of course, what has shaped me as a leader. And I'm not going to go through all of it. And you all know part of the literature. You'll see one of Erik's books on the list as well, Teal, Dots in an Orange World. But this notion of, I think, the first picture of lead and be led. So the idea that leadership is not something that is vested in a hierarchy, but leadership is something that we take turns in doing, again, depending on the situation and depending on who's most capable of. And I think that idea was at least new. And the team at that point of time was an international team, so a lot of different both age and cultural backgrounds that we had to take into play. And also this idea of, for us as a leadership team to be able to go on this journey, we need to create the fundamental psychological safety. And therefore, how do you do that? But that's by getting to know each other in the first place. And that starts with me sharing, that starts with me being vulnerable about what do I find difficult, where am I not perfect, where do I need you as a team. So again, to me, those are some of the fundamental building blocks before you start with, you can say, the actual change journey, so to speak. Because one of the learnings that at least I think Erik and I share is that people are very focused on the tools and the processes. Give me the book, give me the recipe, and my experience is that what takes the most time and what is the biggest hurdle is actually the mindset change that needs to happen. And I'm happy to hear if one of you have found a way to fast forward on that, but at least in my book, that's what takes quite some time, simply because it's a personal development journey for most of us, myself included. So it's that combination of doing those things, two things simultaneously that I find the most difficult. So that was a little bit about why are we doing this and what was my personal why for why I wanted to go through the motions of this when, in hindsight, it probably would have been easier to just stay within the boundaries, but I thought this was actually the better way. And that leads to this last slide around the why, which is actually from one of the kickoff meetings, namely, what are some of the benefits? How do we measure if this is better or a better path to value creation than any of the other many paths that we could have chosen? Because, make no mistake, at least in the corporate world where I sit in, you don't get any excuse from delivering results. I'm still measured on the same things as all of my peers. So, towards the outside the teal dot that we created, it's still the same expectations. I still need to deliver on a budget, on a top line, on a bottom line. So this is more about creating a different way of getting to those results, because I have a fundamental belief that people, who are part of this way of working, become more engaged, and therefore they are creating better results. But that's, of course, a hypothesis that we are all practicing and seeing if that's, then also true, and taking the learnings and adjusting the path along the way. So some of the benefits that I, again, here highlighted to the team that I would like for us to measure ourselves upon was, delivering outstanding results, but through, you can say, engaged employees leading to engaged customers and superior results, but also faster and better decision making. So again, decisions made where it makes sense and not waiting for the hierarchy or the corporate to respond. Still building deep, in our case, both industry and functional excellence. So again, we can't take the core of what, in this case, Novozymes does out of the equation. But again, we just have to create different ways of doing it than what we had established in the past. And then I think one of the things that I got the most response to was this idea of we are all adults, in our private life. We buy a house, or at least we have big decisions that we are trusted to take. But once we come into the corporate world, it's as if some of that authority is taken away. So this idea of treating adults as adults, trusting that people come with the best intentions. They have signed up to work for Novozymes because they want to work for our fantastic purpose, and that trusting that they will do what they think is best for the company, for the team, for themselves, and outweighing those things. So this idea of being seen, being heard as highly capable adults was something that, to my surprise, actually resonated and was long sought for in people. And they felt like this, yes, finally, now somebody is, treating us as equals, and not this idea of, you can say, superior and subordinate, that the hierarchy, directly or indirectly also forces upon us. Then, of course, there's a fight for talent also in our part of the business. So this is also an idea to say, can we create both a relevant place to work, a progressive workplace that caters for what all of us are longing for, at the same time, hopefully retain all the good people that we have and make it more attractive to join our company or our department than some of the others. So those were at least some of the things that we were looking to realize with these experiments. And then what are then some of the ingredients into the recipe that everybody is longing for? And I put as the heading here, ingredients, but adjust for the right flavor. So this is where we also have pulled in Erik to say, these are at least 8, and maybe there's more in your respective cookbooks, but these are the 8 things that we chose to work on. And I already mentioned the first one, which is around the mindset. And this goes for the mindset of leaders, but it also goes for the mindset of employees, and it especially goes into the interface between the teal dot and the orange world, and how do we actually explain to the remaining orange world what it is that we are doing, and what Erik sometimes calls the gardener of the ecosystem, which has been a lot my role to go around and try to explain, not necessarily justify, but at least explain how do we then interact, how do we work with roles when it's not vested into hierarchies and positions. That comes into both leadership skills, but also into the whole mindset of what is this that we're doing. Then we put an element around culture, closely linked to that as well. And what is culture? Well, my definition of culture is it's the behaviors that we promote and encourage, as well as the behaviors that we do no longer allow for. And there, I will say we've had to take some tough calls on the behavioral side. I think one of the questions in one of the previous sessions was also around, how do you deal with people who would just prefer that things were the same, and who does not want to become part of this journey that, I have initiated. And yes, there was a lot of enthusiasm, but you always have the people who said that, why do we need to do that? And I'm not sure I want to be part of that. And you need to have, at least in my experience, an open and honest conversation with them listening to the concerns, understanding where they're coming from. There's a lot of good things in what we have built up in what we now call the orange world that we can still learn from and take on. But what are some of the things that I would like to be changed? And if they are not willing to go on that journey and the majority actually thinks that this is the right experiment, then there's also a point of time where you need to say, maybe it's not the right place for you. Doesn't mean you have to leave Novozymes. You can be in a different place or, find out. But those conversations also have to be had so that at least you can say you have an alignment mindset and culture-wise to go on to this new ways of working or creating a Teal dot. So then there's the actual work around new ways of working, which both is a tools, but a mindset journey as well. It comes with leadership skills and employment skills that I talked about. And then in the two different, you can say, programs or experiments that we've run, we've not been particularly dogmatic around what tools, some teams wanted to use Scrum, some wanted to use classical Agile. It's been relatively loose when you come to how do you want to organize your world. And we've not been dogmatic around what kind of principles do you need to apply, but actually more taking an approach of also learning along the way, but instilling this mindset of experimentation and innovation and learning and cycles that we also know from agile ways of working and working in sprints and adjusting was also something that people from a mindset point of view needed to adjust to. Simply because, and I observed that myself, we're used to that when we're making a change, we change from A to B, and then we kind of assume that B stays relatively permanent. So this idea of that B might be changed back to A or to C or to something completely different in 3 months' time and 6 months' time was, at least for us, one of the things that people needed to get used to, that we take a decision now, but it's not necessarily permanent. That comes with uncertainty. It comes sometimes also with this normal change friction. So how do you create a sense of stability and progression and at the same time have flexibility? Now, time is flying when you have a lot to say, so I'm going to fast forward and just share with you some of the what's, because at least when I'm participating in sessions like this, I'm also eager to see, okay, so what does it look like? So I've taken some of those, and we're not going to spend a hell of a lot of time, but just some of it. So one of the things that we did was, for example, how do you then draw an organizational diagram? At least in corporates that I am in, that's a lot where you're being asked for. So how are you organized? So we need to find a new way of drawing up how are we organized, or how do we organize work, and how do we organize people? And that then became famously known as the donut. And what you can see in the donut is that we had 3 different concepts. A home, which is the outer layer, and in that we actually had 4 different homes because it's a commercial organization. So there was a sales home, marketing home, a tech service home, and a laboratory. So that's where you build your functional excellence. You have a sense of belonging. That's also where your people development skills conversations happen. You saw in one of the previous slides this principle of choosing your own leader. We haven't gone that far yet, but you can say at least that's part of the notion, is that you can actually choose who do you want to be developed by. So as a home zone, then there is, you can say, places where work gets done. So in this case, we are, delivering projects, selling to customers. That happens in what we call the cells. And in this particular team, there were 2 different cells based on the different industries. And then around that, we had what we call bubbles. So those are more organic projects that come and go, and where the team is very responsible for initiating, you can say, what kind of projects do we want to work on? So what kind of bubbles? And that can be, you can say, product, customer, competence, new innovation. So it can have a lot of different varieties. And then people are deployed, or you can say sign up themselves for homes, cells, and bubbles. Not continuously, because then it becomes real chaos, but with a certain kind of rhythm. But you can say a lot of people actually had a desire to develop what we will call, you can say, horizontal skills. So if you've been in sales for a long time, but you actually have an affinity to learn more about marketing, this way of organizing, we found, enabled that to a much higher degree than in our more fixed functional silos that we came from. And if you take the next slide, Erik, then you just get a snapshot of, so what does that look like at a certain point of time? I think this was in the fall, where you just see, you can say the outer circle is relatively stable with the homes, but then in the middle you have the 2 delivery cells, grain processing and bioenergy, and then you have a lot of bubbles around and a lot of people deployed, and then in bold was, you can say, the actual lead. And what this gives is that it gives a lot of transparency, also to me, around what are we actually working on. It gives transparency to the team of what's going on. So there was a lot more cross-fertilization of knowledge between the bubbles than before. It gives the ability to actually sign up to what you would like to be part of, given that you have the time for that. And then you can say also this idea of killing things, because there's so many other things that you can engage yourself in. So we also found it much more easy to initiate, but also kill ideas, which sometimes can be difficult. Because people, if I kill my project, what's going to happen to me? But here you have transparency of, okay, there's so many other things that I would like to do. So let's focus on the ones that have highest impact or ease of implementation or whatever prioritization the different teams were making. And then in the spirit of just sharing a couple of other examples, some of the things we worked with the teams, and we put quite a lot of effort and time, you can say, on top of daily work, simply to drive the change in the first 6-9 months, and then it becomes, you can say, more running business. So some of it was about, zooming in on what is actually the impact that we're making, both internally and externally, and what's the business case, because that's something that you will be asked for. So we needed to align on, why are we doing this, and what value do we believe it's going to create. That's the impact stories and business cases. Then we spent quite a lot of time on this idea of empowerment. So again, where do we want to be on, certain different parameters, but also, how do we decide as a team, how comfortable are we with different levels of delegation? And we found that across the different teams, also, depending on the maturity, it was not always that we want to make all the decisions. So the sliders all the way to the right, if you can see the small icon that they wanted, but playing this game of actually finding out what are we comfortable making decisions around, where would we actually like, maybe sometimes Susanne to make the decision, or at least set the frame, or other types of leaders, and where do we actually want to feel comfortable making the decision ourselves, created a very good transparency, just going through what are all the things that we do deal with, and then deciding where do we want to put the delegation or the level of empowerment. So at least I've been in many organizations with the idea of empowerment, and everybody thinks that full empowerment within the right frames is the right. Not necessarily for all types of decision, was at least one of the learnings that we found out here. So I can highly recommend going through that exercise, whether you're in a Teal dot or not. Created a lot of good discussions and learnings. And then you can say very practical tools of, how to then run this on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis. The team used role descriptions and a role tool to then step out of this idea of fixed positions, but more roles. And that was also a way for us to create transparency to the Orange world around, okay, so who's responsible in this next 6 months for a given task or a given process? And then we used the Kanban on a weekly basis to prioritize work and making sure that there was progress, which also creates a lot of transparency to me when I'm being asked what's going on. So those were just some of the snapshot of some of the practical tools that we've used in getting started on this journey. And I think in the interest of time, I think you will get all the slides, but I think we'll skip this one. But this was just to say that there's a lot of different tools that you can apply. So what were then some of the obstacles or difficult points? And I think the first one is, I already touched upon, is this idea of mindset versus tools. So at least my experience is that when you introduce something new, people want something tangible, right? So it's fine, Susanne, that you talk about lead and be led and empowerment and Teal, Give me the recipe and the steps that we need to take, and then we will go and implement that. And that's not what this journey is about. And I think we had quite a lot of time, discussion, and workshops around how do you actually walk on 2 legs at the same time. So your mindset, your whole notion around this, at the same time as you're learning new processes, tools, ways of collaborating. So that's the first one where we found, and we can elaborate more on that. The second one is the classical friction. So how do you then, what do you do in the Teal dot, and how do you still collaborate, with the Orange world? Spend quite a lot of time on translating. We're still dependent on a lot of other functions, and most times I don't have, you can say, all the things that we need within the Teal dot. So how do you have this brokerage role? How to explain? How much time do you invest? Who spends the time? In that friction, I think, is another thing to really pay attention to if you venture down this path. Something that also came up quite early was, okay, we're used to that there was a certain career path, and with that followed rewards and salaries. But now you can say you're flattening the hierarchy. It's more about, you can say, developing and adding more experience into your backpack. But how do we then reward that? And how does my career, and especially since we're part of a bigger organization, how does my career then compare to my peers outside? If I want to change job, or if I want to be promoted, how do we promote in an organization where there are no, you can say, formal leadership roles, and there are, you can say, very little hierarchy compared to what we had when we started with. And we haven't solved and we haven't cracked that nut. So curious also to learn from you guys. And then the question that I always get, does it work? So did you realize all the benefits? And that's, of course, one of the most difficult questions to answer. So what I can say is that we have delivered outstanding results in the two different, so financial results in the two different experiments. So at least you can say it has not done harm to the financial outcome. We've also seen extremely high scores on employee engagement, but of course it's always difficult to make complete causality between, because we did this, is that you can't say if you've taken a different path, would you then have created same results or better. So my best testimony is that people want to work this way. They want to continue working this way, even when we give them the option to say, would you like to go back, or would you like to should we adjust? Of course we need to adjust all the time, but the idea that people say, no, this feels like the right thing to do, let's continue down this path, let's adjust. That to me is the best testimony, and especially when it comes from people who've been in the organization for 25 years, maybe classical, more hierarchical backgrounds from a culture point of view, and they still find that this makes sense. To me, that tells me that we're on to something, as long as the you can say classical results are not deviating too much also. So that was just a brief fly-in, and I spent more time than I was supposed to, I think, on the Novozymes case. And now Erik will try to extrapolate some of that to more general learnings.
Great stories, great learnings. What I have brought with me here are 2 slides from my learnings from doing this. I think I've done this 20 or tried it at least 20 times over the past years in highly regulated industries like life science or engineering or banks or whatnot. So I have 2 slides with learnings that I'd like to share with you. The first learning, it is possible, period, or exclamation mark. And the benefit that I can see that can be created is faster decision-making, or a sense of belonging or ownership of the tasks that people, for example, self-nominate themselves or self-assign themselves to tasks. And psychological safety is also things that people constantly pull out, that is actually what we are creating. So it is possible with some very specific takeaways that we can create. Number 2, it takes a long time. It takes 2 years. The first 6 to 9 months are used for structure and roles and mechanisms and all the pragmatic stuff. And then yet a year and a half on, as you also said, the mindset changed. The shift in how you approach people, how you approach tasks, and how you approach challenges and feedback before it becomes an organizational habit. And that's there might be inter or personal changes. I'll come to that later. But the organizational habit sticks after 2 years. It takes that long time. Number 3, here are 3 ways to kill your teal dot. It can absolutely be done. Starvation, like forgetting it, and just like, let's not talk about it, and we do not harvest the learnings. That's one way to do it. That's the long, painful way. Eagerness, being too eager, why haven't you produced the business case, is also a way. And the fastest way actually is just to reorg, take you away, and then poof, your teal dot is gone. I have seen teal dots disappear within 15 minutes in a reorg. It's really fast and really painful. So that's 3 ways you can kill it. So, and if you flip that, that's 3 ways. So what to avoid, what to mitigate when it comes to that. Number 4, size matters. It turns out that building teal dots of a size of about 50 is sustainable. It's about charisma. How much social capital can you navigate in before you need some kind of other approach, which might be a new way of orange. So size matters. A pocket of 50 is a good size. It sticks. When it sticks to the people. The popcorn effect is real. So, and that's why I got the bowl of popcorn in there. When you experience the way that this actually works, it sticks to the people. If you listened into what Lisa Gill talked about earlier today, she thought when you get to that stage 4, when you experience that, it sticks with you. Perry Timms also talked about it in the morning. When you get to it sticks with you as a personal thing, even though you are exploded out and somewhere else inside your organization or in a new organization, you take that with you and you start setting expectations to each other. It sticks to the people. More learnings. Keep the orange world away as long as you can. Be nuanced and targeted in how you scope your new ways of working. Maybe start with delegation. Maybe start with your structure. Maybe start with how you navigate decision making. And then, as you also said, the tough parts, keep them away as long as you can until you have learned something about where you have created personal and emotional anecdotes about working in the world, and then take upon the tough challenges like salary, like bonuses, like career pathing and all of that. So keep it away and scope. Make sure that you scope what you're working on. Be aware of the interfaces and the friction. And my biggest advice would be to keep people informed and involved. The people that you work with, that is interfacing either your team or your orange world or your leaders above, keep them involved, keep them informed, and make agreements on what they want to be involved in and what not, like playing the delegation poker with your senior vice president. What do they want to be involved in and what not, and how far away can you push them and take upon yourself to be the adult. Translate the principles to the local practices. I cannot say this and stress this enough. All of the principles that we talk about at this conference, like the wholeness, self-leadership, evolutionary purpose, decision-making, all of those principles are good and they do actually scale, but the principles need to be translated to the practices. The tools come in, the delegation poker, the Kanban boards, all of that, make sure that it is translated. And make sure that you revisit your translation from time to time. All of these agreements should have an expiration date, for example, 3 months, and then you do it again to make sure that you harvest all your learnings and your emotional experiences. Here's a good place to start. Delegation. The nuanced delegation, as you also talked about, is a brilliant conversation starter to understand what actually goes on. Go find your set of cards, those delegation poker cards. I got them right behind me. You can buy them from Management 3.0. They have a web shop. They are brilliant. I love them. Mm-hmm. Number 10, be patient. Be persistent. Be persistent, 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 all over and over again. And lastly, be the change. Be the change that you want to have. Go first, be the role model, be vulnerable, have the conversation. These are my learnings. So we all are thinking about these two worlds, they have to live together. We are not that, pure in our thinking that we only are going to have teal in an orange world. We are going to have a mix of the lady with the soap bubbles who's very fluent and buoyant and adaptable, and the sturdiness of the machine with the predictability and the scalability in there. We need both parts, and they need to be addressed in the way that suits them. That's it.
Yeah.
That's
thanks a lot for sharing your insights and learnings around that, and maybe just really building on what you just shared, that both things still happen in parallel. Can you explain a little bit, and Susanne, you talked about how successful it actually was, and how you yield great business results. What do you feel are the biggest obstacles to just have way more teal dots in your organization? What do you feel like would need to be unleashed to either grow the dot or just kind of increase the number of dots that you have?
I can start. So I will say that first of all, it takes personal courage combined with, as Erik says, the right level of patience and persistence. So again, you can say I was not asked to introduce this. It's not part of how we, run things in Novozymes. So I think, you need to have the personal ambition, courage, curiosity to go on this journey, or go and ask, for permission to do it if you're not in a position to make the decision yourself. And I think it starts with that. And I've actually been surprised about how curious my colleagues have been after a while to say, okay, there's something going on. But from there and then on to, okay, why don't you create the same in your part of the organization?
Yeah.
So I think it's to Erik's point of view, you need to, at least when you're a leader initiating this, or whoever is initiating it, you need to pop yourself first and kind of be convinced. And you can say, here we're preaching to the choir of people who thinks that this is the right way to do. But if you are grown up in an orange world and you've not been exposed to it and you've not experienced it on your own body, I think it takes a lot to actually
starts with yourself.
Get started. Yeah. And again, it comes with a risk. And if I'm to be a little bit, you could say, do you want to take that risk, right? Maybe it's easier to not do it. So it comes because what if we'd failed? What if we'd not delivered the results? So we made a psychological safety agreement. We're in this together. We win together and we lose together. So I'll be the first one kind of to lose in that game. But it was necessary to create that, so people felt like, okay, I have your back. You're not in. I'm not going to just throw you out if we fail on results or employees or the other things that we were measuring on. Anything to add?
I think I experienced that, especially senior leaders, they listen to each other. It's not normal that a senior leader listens to a consultant like me. They listen to each other in their network. So storytelling amongst each other, sharing the good and bads of ups and downs will inspire people. I think that's actually the way to get it populated.
You talked about like this evolution from a position-based to a role-based environment. You said you're not fully there with all the salaries and development path, but can you say a little, how did you start that transition from a position to role-based, and what are maybe also some next steps or like the next phase of your evolution that you plan to put in place in the next couple of months or year?
Yeah, very good point. And this was again one of the aha moments, I think, for the team. And again, these are people where some of them have been in the organization for a long time. But we started with, you can say, the jobs to be done. So what are actually the jobs that we are doing? In sales and marketing and technical service and in the laboratory. And then from that on, we said, okay, what are then the roles that are needed to, you can say, complete those jobs to be done? Not, you can say, the roles as we know them today, but the roles that we would like to have. And then people from there on could say, okay, I would like for the next period of time, 3 to 6 months, to take on these roles. So I may, throw away the label that you had in your job description and your functional role. And people were okay, even though we are in a lot of different legal jurisdictions, to say, okay, so we didn't change any contracts. Everybody was still employed in their role, but you can say they played along and said, I'm going to just, I have that, I have my salary and everything else, but for the coming period of time, I'm going to transition and take upon these roles. And we used a tool to actually map out the different roles linked to jobs to be done.
There was actually a concrete question on the tools that you use also to visualize the leadership tasks and roles. Maybe seems to be some interesting question from also the audience. Can you explain like how that exactly looked like, or what tool you used for that?
Yes, Erik, you're more of the tool experts here.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The first thinking about, we, in a gentle way, we do not care about your title. We care about your role. So we need to start with understanding what are, as you said, the jobs to be done, then fleshing out what are the roles that are needed to lift those. And for those roles, we need to see, okay, what kind of leadership, personal skills, toolings, etc. does that entail? Stuff like, how do you have the good conversation? How do you select your own tasks that you want to be part of? There are pretty many mechanisms for just choosing what you do and choosing how you align stuff. If you want to look into the toolbox of sociocracy, for example, that's a very good way to start and pull out some of the things about how do you do rounds, how do you have a good meeting, how do you get feedback, how do you decide stuff when there's no explicit leader. Those are very good tools to start with. I know that's not strictly Teal, but it's the same ballpark of understanding that we do this together, and I genuinely respect who you are. Also pulling out stuff that you alluded to, something like the some of the good things from Scrum, for example, is the retrospective, that you stop and pause and reflect and do that in a mechanistic way so that you learn not only what you do, but how you work together. So that's kind of the toolbox in that.
And Susanne, you talked a lot about kind of also the culture and the required culture change around that. And there was one comment that says like a lot of corporate cultures are more ego driven. It's about kind of the ranks that you have and protecting yourself and all that. And that's a really tough nut to crack. Like how did you approach that to get people more like purpose driven versus kind of protecting myself and trying to drive my ego agenda?
Yeah. So again, from the latest experiment here, I spent the first 6-9 months working with 2 of the directors who again been with the company for a long time, feeding them with inspiration, with books that they needed to read to kind of get them onto the journey. And then they started getting curious. And then you can say they were both at a point of their career where they were like, okay, the worst thing that can happen is then, we'll have to go on an early retirement. So again, we kind of made that psychological contract that you can say that they were willing to invest their ego to say, okay, if it fails, we'll, if everything goes wrong and, it doesn't and it never will, and you'll stop it before that. But that they were kind of willing to say, but it took kind of 6-9 months of me nudging, inspiring. I could have made the call, but then I knew they would not be on board. So it was not until they were like, okay, it's not going to go away. She's not going to go away. And then you can say, we feel comfortable with her way of working. We feel comfortable that she has our back. We will now start. And then when you see 2 relatively senior, in this case, directors, well known in the company, as Erik says, people are inspired by people. If they go on the journey, if they are willing to put their 25 years of very successful career aside and say, I'm going to venture into this, it's a learning journey, that inspires the next level. But I think where we more kind of saw the clashes of the egos is the people who've been waiting to come up, whether it's then to senior manager or director or whatever, then they suddenly see that what I've now been working for, it has disappeared. And that's where I had to go and take some of the conversations and say, what we're doing is not going to make you less obsolete or less relevant as an employee. It's not going to make you obsolete. You might actually be training skills that will be more sought for, in what I believe is the future of also corporates and elsewhere. But of course, there are no guarantees when we don't have a promotion system in place. And so they also have. So I totally agree. There's a lot of ego and career, but again, it's just something that we've created, and we have the opportunity to create something which I think is better. So, yeah.
One of the pieces you showed very concretely was the bubbles and the operating system that you run. And there was one question around like the balance between your reflection on the more structured approach that I think you displayed versus a more organic experimental approach. I don't know what your take on that is, if you traded off alternatives, or what is the benefits and pros and cons of both approaches.
Yeah, I think I'm probably less preoccupied with structures. I didn't need for it to be, you can say, so structured and with so many, you can say, tools as you see here. But it was clearly a call for the team that we need some kind of backbone to hold on to. So that's why we came up with this donut. We need something that we can, rally around, something that we can explain to the outside world. And that's why then we need to invent something. But we need to draw it up in a different way that more represents our reality. So that was a response to, I would say, the need of the team. I don't know if you see it the same way.
Yeah, kind of the same way. My reflection is that if you give a leader a pen and a piece of paper and ask them to draw the organization, however that drawing ends is a reflection of the mindset in that leader. If the leader starts drawing a hierarchy, then you know who you're dealing with. If the leader starts drawing something flat that is bubbly, then you know what you're doing with. So just the narrative is say we're going away from this, we're going into this area, which instills a mindset and a narrative of where we're going, of equality and transparency and adaptability and flexibility. That underpins what we're doing. And organization is just, you would say, it's a fictitious thing. It doesn't exist. It only exists due to the contracts, either physical or mental contracts that we have with each other. So we're trying to recreate the narrative of, see, this is why we're together. And the illustration is flat and it's bubbly and it's movable. So that's the main purpose of it.
And I think what worked really well was this idea of you have a home it's also called a home. So people have this kind of sense of belonging where you feel like you are rallying among equals. You can share your concerns. You're building expertise. And then at the same time, you have the flexibility, experiments, the learning journeys that happens both in the cell and in the bubbles. So I think that balance worked out quite well, at least the response we were getting.
And Susanne, you talked a lot about talking to some of your stakeholders, getting them on board. There was one question around when you created those roles, when did you involve the broader organization? How did you approach that co-creating it, or was that more done with kind of still the leadership team?
Yeah, so very few things were done in the leadership team, also because there is, you can say, not that much of a leadership team. So it was done in, you can say, either the homes or in the cells, and then they were kind of seeing, okay, let's not make sure we make it too different. So they were aligning among themselves. But then, and there are quite a lot of processes that have a certain rhythm to them that we need to follow. So, monthly reporting on demand planning or supply, financials, etc. So we quite quickly had to engage, and quicker than we actually wanted, to engage with the Orange World to say, okay, for the monthly demand plan meeting, you're not going to see me as the VP or the director. It's going to be Susanne, because Susanne has that role. And people were like, okay, but how do we then escalate if there's a problem, and who do we escalate to? So you run into all these Orange World questions, and you could say, and is Susanne capable of doing that? And all sorts of other objections, and those we had to face on quite a number of jobs to be done, because they have this rhythm in the Orange World that we cannot escape. And or at least I wasn't. I knew that if we were to have success, we probably needed to deliver everything that the old delivers and do something on top.
And you talked about you need to deliver to the Orange World, right? Your KPIs, the metrics, they won't change. Outside of those performance indicators, where do you feel the most friction as well? Where do you feel like things clash between the teal dot and the orange world around you? And how do you deal with that?
I can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
It can be really tough to know who you go to, who actually, who decides, and who decides. Which is a really good question, actually. So, and that kind of, do I go to you? Do you have the mandate, or have you
delegated it?
Moved the mandate to somewhere else? So who to go to for decisions that involve some kind of collaboration across this barrier? That's a classic one.
Yeah, but I was, so again, back to friction. I actually think that while people were maybe, surprised or thought we were, kind of stupid or crazy, people were very accommodating. So I've met more, and maybe that's also says something about neuroscience, but more curiosity than friction. And then, as you say, this impatience around, okay, so, if we have to make decisions fast, can we just still call you, and then you will figure out in this teal dot? And then sometimes I just said, yes, then we do that. And then I figure out how to do it, right? So, because otherwise people get too frustrated outside. But I think people are pretty curious around, and especially when they see that, okay, people like this, and employment engagement is going up, leadership scores are going up, results are coming. Okay, they must be doing something right. So it's more curiosity than resistance. Yeah.
And Erik, you still quoted the Teal principles, right? Of wholeness and self-organization and so forth. If you look at your setup, where do you feel like, okay, we're actually quite far advanced with adopting those principles, and what's still a little bit on your bucket list where you feel like, hey, that there we still have a way to go, or that's most difficult to really implement out of the paradigm of Teal?
Okay, if you strictly look at how they are defined, I really find that the evolutionary purpose is the toughest one to navigate in. Wholeness and self-leadership, they can be balanced out, and they actually support each other pretty well. When you start working with the one, you get the other, etc. So that's like a yin and yang challenge. But truly understanding evolutionary purpose, or that you can, or as I paraphrase it, you can affect what you do on, you can self-assign, you can focus on the impact stories that you want to do, so that you produce meaningful results, meaningful work, meaningful relationships. I think that's the toughest part, because that's a massive change from being traditional, explicit, profit-driven to something that where you also have something that is based on something else. I think that's the toughest massive change to allude to.
And can you share how did you any practices or any things that you concretely did in order to bring that principle to life?
I think I always talk about the impact stories. I think that's one of the most powerful way of doing that. We do something so that somebody else can do something. And that kind of understanding that you help each other in obtaining something, and you focus on the impact and the value that you create. What are the jobs to be done, and what's the impact that you create by doing those jobs? Again and again and again, to be persistent about that narrative.
And then I think in the context of Novozymes, we are helped by the fact that you could say we are a purpose-driven leadership. We have lead with purpose as one of the four, you can say, core values. So while we are still, you can say, traded on the stock market and with all those expectations on profit, etc., you know, there's a high and there's always been a strong purpose and people come to Novozymes because they want to save the world. They sign up because of the purpose. So from that point of view, we're pretty advanced in that thinking. And then it's more, as you say, on kind of the more granularity of my own, you know, what am I contributing with, and how does that make sense that we have still some.
It's probably a bit easier in the healthcare sector than in some other industries to portray that and engage people around it. Yeah. I mean, you have now 65 Teal interested people, at least in the room. If you think of really scaling that movement, like, what do you feel? What would it really take? You talked about kind of that individual courage and the determination, but I mean, if you really feel like this conference is also a platform for the community to, make that not a pilot or like the pioneers who do it, but to really scale it. What do you feel? What are the biggest roadblocks at the moment, or what would be your call for action to this group to? Yeah.
You go first.
Both of you.
No, I will start, and then Erik can think. So I will steal Erik's. One of your takeaways was that it can be done, right? So I think that, you know, if you're contemplating whether you want to start or whether you're leading a team or you are advising a consultant, I think my biggest takeaway is from now the 2 experiments that I've run, you know, that it can be done with a good outcome. So, you know, don't sit and wait any longer. Get started and then tackle the obstacles as they arise and pull on this community and other good people that you know. I think that's very nice when if you're a lonely writer in your organization, that you have somebody to lean on and spare with. But I think the most important is this kind of getting over that humble of it can be done. Get started. Have the courage. I think it is a better path to value creation.
There's no excuse anymore. It sounds like.
Erik?
I think you can scale it if you start to understand what scalability actually is, because some people misunderstand scalability and scaling when it comes to Teal. Some people say that, okay, we're going to have Teal everywhere. And I think that narrative is wrong. What does scale? The Teal principles, they scale. If you have like this burger, where the top bun is your Teal principles, they scale. They absolutely do. We believe in people. We believe in self-leadership. We believe in the meaningfulness. That scales. The lower bun also scales. That's the infrastructure. Your pieces of software, your transparency, your cultural virtues. That also scales. So the top bun of the burger and the lower bun scales. What does not scale is the small inner dots. They have an outside limit, which is tied into social capital. And I do believe that it's 50 small dots of 50 between these 2 burger buns. That's how you scale it.
And I would add to that, you know, don't be blind to that. You can say even within your orange world, you have local subcultures, whether they are driven by functional culture or geographical culture, or, you know best what's kind of significant in your organizations. And again, that the Teal dot has to be able to cater for that. So Teal, in my case, in the commercial organization, looks different than a Teal dot would look like in R&D, than in production, than in supply chain. And I think you need to also be, as you say, flexible, adaptable in that. So you can't just take what I've done and then say, now we're going to take that and plaster it all over the rest of the 6,000 Zymers. That wouldn't work.
And you just like the size, like there's a kind of a maximum to much bigger than 50. Do you feel like there's a minimum, like where hey, it's too small, Teal principles wouldn't work, or from your experience doesn't matter?
2 persons.
Okay, that was small.
Yeah, that's more.
That's not worth it. No.
So not even a 2 pizza rule, but a 1 pizza rule.
Yeah, one piece. Yeah, but it's about if you're collaborating with somebody. We have been collaborating for what, 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
In setups. It is the interplay. As long as there's somebody else that you need to respect and coordinate with, you can apply it.
Yeah.
But I would say from a, if you want to run an experiment as such, I would say a minimum size of 20-25 in order to get some of the complexity that you face. I think is somewhere in that's not a good.
That's good.
Yeah. There's one more question I read on basically the interface between your world and the traditional world around the HR positions, hierarchy levels, and so forth. You said you kind of parked that topic, right? If I understood you right.
Yeah, you could say what we did. We have an advisory board where we on purpose have HR as one of the participants to both inform them of what we're doing, but also kind of help co-create on how might we then put in reward systems, etc. So that's one thing that we have in place to kind of keep the orange world. And then we have a classic stakeholder map and stakeholder communication plan that from all change initiatives that we on a you can say a certain frequency touch base with the relevant stakeholders to make sure that it doesn't go we are off on a limb.
Cool. Thanks a lot for sharing also on all those questions. I think we got to all the questions asked in the Mentimeter. I just posted the link also to the spatial chat. So if somebody wants to still catch up with this group, have any follow-up conversation exchange on that, please join that link to spatial chat and let's meet there. Other than that, I very much enjoyed the exchange with you from our first conversation to also now facilitating this session, and all the best for your journey with that and bringing that to the next level.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you, guys.